Welcome back to another Accidentally Intentional podcast episode where we are on a mission to destroy loneliness by building rich relationships. And in this episode, we're going to talk about how to be less socially awkward and as a result become more likable. So stay tuned because here we go. So in this episode, we are focusing specifically on social cues, as in body language cues that you can use to immediately help you in situations where you're meeting new people in person and face-to-face. Because let's face it, in-person settings are hands down the most challenging when it comes to meeting new people because you have to be your full self. But along with that challenge, there's the best opportunity for building deep relationships because you're both coming together as your full selves in an interaction. And when it comes to communication, it's broken down into 3 parts. 7% of communication is through words. Isn't that crazy? That we think communication is literally just verbal, but really that's the smallest amount of what communication really is. 38% is your tone of voice in which you say it. So you might be a texter who says, people always misunderstand what I'm saying and I don't really understand it. Or maybe you're getting a text message from somebody else and then you get paranoid and you're like, oh my gosh, like that's coming across like they're mad at me. That's why, because tone is missing in written communication. So again, face-to-face communication helps offset this. So 7% is words, 38% is tone, and the remaining 55% is body language. So that is a mighty important piece of this entire equation. And I have led small groups in my life, and one of the small groups stands out more than the rest because I opened our entire 12-week small group together by asking this one question. I said, who in the room feels like they're awkward when meeting new people? And every single hand went up in the room. And it was then that I realized something about this. We feel awkward because maybe the situation itself of meeting new people is in fact awkward. And it's not as much us as the environment and scenario in which we're placed upon. So how do we make the most of these in-person settings when we're trying to build new friendships, new relationships, etc.? Well, we all have a desire to be fully known and fully loved. And so the gateway to all of that is starting by enjoying somebody, liking spending time with somebody else. And obviously the inverse to be true, people enjoying spending time around you too. And so a lot of what we're talking about today has to do with body language cues because that is a really powerful way to present yourself to someone else as likable and interested in them as a person, in what they have to say, and everything else that makes human interactions human interactions. So I want to shout out Vanessa Van Edwards, who wrote the book Cues. I was such a nerd. I loved this book. I took so many notes, and a lot of what we're talking about today is based upon her book. She is brilliant, and she studies body language for a living. And so she actually calls herself a recovering awkward person. And so everything that we're talking about today will, of course, help you become less socially awkward. So in her book, she starts by defining charisma. And you know what charisma is. It makes you drawn to somebody because they just have it going on, or else it comes across as such. And charisma is magnetic. People want to be around others that are charismatic. And she found through her research that charisma is the perfect blend of warmth, kindness, and competence. Warmth tells somebody that they can trust you. Competence tells somebody that they can rely on you. And so we're going to be talking about warmth cues and competence cues that you can give other people that are greatly going to enhance your in-person interactions. So let's put ourselves in the scenario in which we're about to meet somebody new. I want to pause right here because if you're looking for a video to focus on what to say, how to ask better questions, how to actually have an engaging conversation. Well, you're actually going to want to click on this video up here, and I'll also link it in the description below because we focus solely on asking better questions in that video. This video is focusing just on how our body language helps communicate a little bit about who we are and how we perceive and want to engage and interact with the person in front of us. So we talked about charisma being a blend between warmth and competent, and you want to show a little bit of both. So we're going to be talking about 5 warmth body language cues that you can give and 5 competence body language cues that you can give. And you don't need to do all of them, okay? I would say a good goal is in any interaction with people to employ and use 3 of these cues to give people this aura about you that you are, in fact, interested, care, want to know more about them. And if you're listening to the audio version of this, I'm going to do my best to describe it for you, but you can also watch the YouTube version to see these body language cues happen via video. So the first warmth cue that shows people that you're interested in what they have to say is by slightly tilting your head to one side. Now you might be thinking, that's kind of weird. Like, won't it look like, well, you don't become all dramatic. Just a slight tilt says, hey, like, I'm interested in what you have to say. And the reason for this is actually whenever it's hard to hear somebody, you're naturally doing this. Usually we naturally are tilting one side of our head closer towards the person because we're trying to hear what they're saying. So even that shows an interest in the dialogue. Number 2 is nodding your head slowly when they're talking. So we're leaning our head to the right or left slowly and then nodding really slowly at what they have to say. Now, why am I emphasizing slow so much? Well, because think about it. The last time that someone nodded their head at you, you probably remember one of 2 things happening. If you're telling them a story and they're like, yeah, it's giving you this vibe that you should start talking much faster and hurry up with it because they have better things to do. That's what nodding your head really quickly actually signals to somebody else. It's almost like, hey, wrap it up. I got to do something else. And if you actually are trying to be interested in a conversation, then you do not want to snap that head back and forth real quick. You want it to be slow and methodical because that actually pulls more out of someone as a result. And nodding your head 3 times is actually what appears to be, based on science, the magic amount to get people to keep talking. The third one is what's called a savor smile. Now, this could look weird if you do it incorrectly. So this is one I would definitely recommend practicing in the mirror first. Because there's this iconic, I have it in my brain right now, this iconic visual of the Grinch doing a savor smile gone wrong. And it's when the corners of his mouth go up so far and it's like, that looks creepy. But a savor smile is when instead of going immediately from straight face to like smile, you take 2 seconds to get your smile drawn out. It's like slowly working your way into a smile. That's why it's called a savor smile. And when you give someone and flash a savor smile like this, it really makes people feel like you're very engaged in what they have to say and that you're walking alongside them in whatever story or thing that they're sharing with you. So that is another cue that you can employ in these conversations. Now, of course, try it. If it feels weird, then don't do it. But if you like smiling, which is ideal because smiling actually universally makes the person that you are talking to or listening to feel more appreciated. When they get a smile, that's why I would say smiles are always good. You can never really go wrong by choosing to smile at somebody, even if it's not a savor smile specifically. The 4th warmth cue that you can give somebody is laughing. Now, not like a weirdo, like, that's creepy. I'm freaked out. But if they say something that gets you to chuckle, don't hold back on them. Laughing can actually be seen as a compliment in our brains. If someone laughs at what I'm going to say, I'm going to feel more comfortable sharing because I'm like, oh, okay, they're the same page. They think it's funny too. That's awesome. Let's keep going with this conversation. And the fifth one, which has to be done correctly, is eyebrow raising. This is another warmth cue when it comes to body language. Now, you might be thinking that I'm talking about raising one eyebrow, like this. No, it's giving Austin Powers vibes with that. But actually raising both eyebrows at the same time, like this, and getting wide-eyed as a result, shows that you are so engaged in what they have to say. You're interested. And when you're thinking of these 5 cues we just outlined, right, it's obvious. Because as I'm probably flashing them at you, you're getting the same idea. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, this makes sense. It all makes sense. That's the beautiful thing about these cues. But sometimes we overlook them and we get so panicked and self-conscious about how we look that we start internalizing everything instead of really focusing on the conversation happening in front of us. And so if we can learn how to naturally, which takes time, but it's worth it, if we can naturally kind of evolve into flashing these body language cues almost without thinking because we're naturally engaged, then the entire thing is going to feel so much more natural to both parties. So that's it for the warmth cues. And again, warmth emotes and tells somebody that they can trust you, which is, of course, ultimately what we would all love to feel from somebody else. So this is our opportunity to display that to others. And then for the competence cues, we're going through 5 here as well. And again, the competence, whereas warmth shows I can trust you, competence shows that I can rely on you. And competence kind of sounds like you're intelligent. It has to do with smarts. And where that is somewhat true, it's not from the standpoint of I need to prove myself as much as I'm confident in what's happening right now. And if you don't necessarily feel confident as it stands, hang on to the end of this video because we're going to be talking about ways to instantly help your body and mind, and as a result, you feel and be more confident. So going into these competence cues, here's what we got. The first competence cue is the palm flash. Now, you might rewind this video and see that within the first 15 seconds, I exposed the inside of my palm. Why? Well, there's actually a reason for this. When you expose your palms to somebody else, which is always good to go for a handshake, right? Because you're showing your palm, it does something in our brains. And our brains read that as, okay, they're safe. I could trust them. They're not hiding anything. Think about when you're in a Zoom meeting and you're boxed in, right? And someone is talking like this to you the entire time. It almost feels like you're being yelled at. Whereas if someone's, using their hands, bopping their head around, being more dynamic, you feel like it's safer to engage in a dialogue. And that's because showing the hands shows our brains, hey, we can trust you. There's nothing that is hidden and they're a safe person. I can rely on them. And here's another fun fact about flashing the palm and how important it is. They dissected over 400 Shark Tank pitches from the show Shark Tank, where people who were coming to pitch would present their idea to the sharks. And they found that almost all the way across the board, those that exposed their palms within the first 30 seconds were much more likely, if not always, the ones that ended up getting a deal from one of the sharks. That's pretty crazy. This is how deep this goes in our brains. Just that ability to show someone, hey, you can trust me, So I think that's really cool. And it doesn't need to be like, hi, where you're putting both hands up next to your head, but it could be a quick hello, show that part of your hand. handshake, something like that. It could be really simple. Don't overthink it. Just know it's important to flash the inside of the palm real quick. Okay, so that's one for the 5 competence cues. The second competence cue that you can employ is leaning. Now, I want to talk about this for a little bit because I think we often overlook the power of leaning into something. If you think about the last time that you sat down to have a meal with somebody, you are more likely to open up and have a thoughtful dialogue with somebody who is leaning in, hit the microphone with my neck, who is leaning in and they're just really locked in to this conversation with you, as opposed to someone who's sitting straight up with almost like military neck, like can't be moved, stoic, and not making any facial expressions. It registers in your brain and reads to you as like, something's up. Why are they acting so rigid right now? So leaning in gives people that vibe that you are so into this conversation and absolutely want to know more, which makes people feel safe on both ends of that spectrum. And another interesting cue is called fronting. Now, I want to explain this because it might sound misleading at first. Fronting is where your shoulders, head, and toes are all pointing in the same direction the person in front of you, facing that person in front of you. Now, this is really important because if you're having a conversation with somebody and you're not walking, but you're like standing still and your body's facing a different direction, but your head's facing them, our brains are reading that as they are not fully engaged. They have somewhere to be immediately. In fact, if you actually pay attention, now this isn't the case for some people. Some people like to twist their feet out and not have them facing forward. But there is this kind of rule they talk about that you can tell somebody's intentions based upon what direction their toes are facing. Now, that's pretty crazy. And maybe you're having a scenario flash through your mind where you're like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. For instance, if someone's leaning back in a chair and their feet are facing the door, but they're kind of like slouched over, listening to what you're saying, you're probably reading that internally as like, they don't really want to be here right now. And that person could say in response like, no, what are you talking about? Like, of course I do. I'm listening to what you're saying. But their body language, especially with the direction of where their toes are pointing, is saying something else. So I started using this a lot more frequently when I'm trying to really lock in and have a individual conversation with somebody, but the inverse is also true. So let's say that we're in a group environment and I'm not trying to seclude myself and just have a conversation with one person. So instead of facing my body to fully head, shoulders, toes, face that one person, I'm actually going to keep my toes facing opposite directions a little bit and not fully lean my body at them, but keep it more open so that other people know they are free to join in on the conversation and create this, quote, circle, which it could end up looking like. So that's just a fun fact, I think, and also a great body language cue to use, especially when you're really trying to get to know someone on a deeper level. Just put your whole body facing towards them is basically what it comes down to. So the fourth competence body language cue that you can use is actually being smart about your spacing. Have you ever had this situation where you meet somebody new and they're like literally up in your face and you're thinking, holy cow, can you take a step back? But you don't want to be rude. So instead you take a step back. Well, that's because there's a spacing issue going on. And they've determined through research that that's considered the intimate zone. 18 inches and closer is considered the intimate zone. So if you are dating a person, the spouse, a family member, a really close friend, those are probably the only people that we would feel comfortable having in that zone. But if you're not that, then definitely stay at least 18 inches, 2 feet is probably a good marker, away from another person. And that's going to make both of you feel much safer and much more comfortable. And you might be thinking, what is 18 inches apart? Well, if you think about a handshake, keep it that handshake distance. Don't step in closer. Stay at that handshake distance apart. And that should be a good guide and metric for you. And then another great body language cue to use in conversations is the flexed lid. And I laugh because this is another one that you need to be careful and very smart about when you use it, so it doesn't come off as though you are questioning or interrogating somebody. Because it can look like that emoji where both the eyes are like shut and it's kind of sarcastic. I'll throw it up on the YouTube video. It looks like this if you do it wrong. If you're doing it the correct way, the flexed lid is where you lower your lids a little bit, just kind of zooming in. It's giving this visual that you're zooming in on something. And we naturally have a flexed lid when we're having trouble reading or seeing something. We make our eyes smaller when we're trying to see. So a great way to do this is just simply when someone is sharing something and you really want to hear what they're saying and lock in, tilt that head, nod, and just slightly flex the lids as if you're trying to see what they're sharing with you. Again, this is definitely one I'd recommend trying in front of the mirror first and gauging whether it feels weird or looks weird. Because obviously you don't want to be put in a position where any of these feel or look weird to you, because if you feel that way, the other person will feel that. So we've gone through 5 warmth cues and 5 competence cues that you can use when meeting new people. And so now we need to discuss social cues that you should definitely not use when meeting new people, because if you use these, it's communicating absolute disinterest. So as a result, we need to be careful not to use them. All right, here's 5. Leaning back or away. I mean, immediately, if you saw this on YouTube, it looked as if I immediately completely disengaged from the conversation. Or it looked like I think I'm in trouble or something like that. It's not communicating what you want it to if you genuinely are trying to be engaged in a conversation. So that's the first one. Instead of leaning back, let's lean in. Second, if you have your body turned oppositely, and we talked about this with fronting a little bit, but basically, if you really want to get to know somebody, do not have your toes and your torso facing a different direction unless you are walking with the person. That's pretty much the only time where this feels acceptable. Otherwise, if you're standing still, you should be facing towards them, your head, your shoulders, your toes, head, shoulders, knee. Okay, I'm done. It should all be facing the person in front of you. And so the third one that you should definitely not do, and this, I'm so guilty of this, is crossing your arms. Now, crossing your arms is so comfortable, right? It's so comfortable. It's such a relaxed position. But when you cross your arms, it's actually called a blocking social cue. And it's communicating, even if we don't realize it, it's communicating to our brains they are either not interested or they're trying to hide something. And so if you're having a conversation with someone, I know it might feel uncomfortable, but if you keep your hands at your side, it's going to feel a lot better for the person that you're trying to get to know. And you will probably find the same to be true when it happens vice versa. Okay. So those are the first 3. Absolutely do not do these social cues when you're trying to get to know somebody. The fourth one is do not have your cell phone out. But so, what if there's an emergency? Well, I'll tell you this. If you have your phone out, and Simon Sinek has shown this before as well, even just the presence of your phone in a conversation with somebody, even if you're not looking at it, makes somebody feel as though you are distant, have better things to do, and are disinterested. And that you're splitting your attention, if nothing else. See, I'm not even looking at my phone right now, and you felt this. You can feel it right now. You're like, dude, why is your phone out? That doesn't seem appropriate. I agree, it's not. Now you might be thinking, okay, well, what if I put my phone face down on a table, if nothing else? I would say no. And they have done research to prove this. Nir Eyal, in his book about being undistractable, talks about how even the presence in the peripheral of our eyes makes us more tempted to touch the phone and engage on it. And so if you're seeing someone else's phone, you're still feeling that too. You're feeling like, I don't know if they're all here with me right now, to be honest. So my recommendation would be keep that phone away, in your pocket, in your purse, in a backpack, whatever. Don't have it out. And if you're worried about an emergency, then you could tell someone, call twice, come up with a game plan beforehand. And there's times where if I'm going somewhere and it's a long drive, my husband will be like, hey, can you just text me when you're there so that I know? So of course, I'm going to be like, hey, when I just sit down for dinner with somebody, hey, I just need to text my husband real quick, make sure that he knows I'm here. Boom. Then I text, boom, it's in the bag, and then we're done. Everyone who needs to know where I am knows where I am. Then I can have a thoughtful, engaging conversation and dialogue with somebody else. Okay, so that's 4. Number 5 is don't look elsewhere consistently other than making eye contact with the person in front of you. Now, I'm not saying stare them down, obviously, but it's a lot easier to make eye contact with someone when you're listening than when you're talking. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic that goes on. But if someone's talking, for sure, make eye contact with them and revert back to a slow head nod if you want to encourage them to share more about something. If you're that person that's looking elsewhere, I've experienced this personally. If someone is consistently looking elsewhere, I'm thinking as I'm talking to them, do you not care what I have to say? Are you not interested in this conversation? Are you looking for someone else to talk to instead? That's how our brains perceive this directing your gaze elsewhere other than the person in front of you. Now, there's a difference between like glancing, but it shouldn't be so consistent that it looks like someone's about to grab your arm and pull you out of the conversation because you're so frequently looking elsewhere other than that person. So those are the 5. Again, leaning back, having your body turned a different direction than the person facing you, crossing arms, having your phone out, and looking elsewhere are all 5 big no-no social cues when it comes to meeting new people or just having thoughtful dialogue in general. Now, a little further back in this video, I talked about if you have an issue with confidence and feeling confident, having meaningful conversations with people. And I want to pause here for a second because I 100% feel you. I am the same way. Even to this day, I experience and wrestle with social anxiety. I did a whole video on techniques that have helped me with that. You can click up here for that. But truly, I totally understand that because it's a mental battle as well as it is a physical battle to put yourself out there. And so here's what I'd say. You have to believe that you are worth having and building rich relationships. And if you're right now saying, well, I don't, that's okay. Because you can train your body and your mind to believe it by choosing that identity before you actually have it and own it. You can choose to be a friend worth having and building rich relationships. That could be an identity. I'm someone who has rich relationships. Why? Because I did this action, which gives and cast a vote for myself as being such. And so there are ways in which your actions can actually help determine and reinforce the identity that you ultimately want to have. That's what I would say first is choose to believe that you're worth having and building those rich relationships. And as a side note, I don't know if you've heard of Mel Robbins. She's a thought leader. She actually has a book called The High Five Habit, where you high five yourself in the mirror and you might be like, ew, so corny. Why would I do that? Then don't do it. But maybe you're interested in it. There's this technique where you high five yourself. So you're worth building rich relationships today. Let's go against that mirror. Perfect. That's a great way to build confidence by speaking life into yourself. But there's an actual body language technique that you can use. So the first confidence pose is made famous by Dr. Amy Cuddy in what is now a viral TED Talk. And ultimately, the first confidence pose that actually makes you feel more confident as well as comes across as more confident to other people is what's called the Wonder Woman pose, where essentially you are putting your hands at your hips and just straightening your posture. And they actually did a study on this where they would have people go into a public talk, not doing this, versus putting their hands on their hips, spending 30 to 45 seconds in front of the mirror, looking at yourself, appearing confident, and maybe saying some affirmations. And the crazy thing is, the people that did this pose beforehand looked to the audience extremely more confident, even though by the time they got on stage, they weren't doing this pose at all. But it almost primes your brain to give you the confidence you need when you're entering a setting where you don't feel that. A second one is what was in the book Cues by Vanessa Van Edwards, and it's a little bit more nuanced. I prefer this one because you can actually do it anywhere. Not just in the bathroom or strutting around like this. This one, you don't put your hands on the side of your hips at all, but there's 3 or 4 steps to it. So the first one is you elongate the distance between your shoulders and your ears. So like this. So it's ultimately gonna fix your posture by doing that. The second thing is put your feet slightly further apart than you normally would. Now it might feel weird at first, but it'll make more sense because the third part is the distance between your shoulders increase slightly, and instead of keeping your hands at your side, put them about 3 inches away from your body. And what also needs to happen is instead of having your arms kind of like this, I have shoulder problems, so my shoulders turn inwards a little bit, is being cognizant of that and making sure your thumbs are parallel and facing outward straight in front of you. So it changes a position like this when you're talking to someone to this. And it might feel weird at first, but it doesn't look super weird. In fact, it helps you if you're in a setting where you're standing up, networking, and you're tempted to cross your arms, because this is gonna take care of that and make you more in tune with the conversation as you emote and emit confidence and feel that same confidence for yourself. Those are a lot of body language social cues that you can use to, as a result, become less socially awkward and therefore become more likable and seem like you're a very interested person in conversations and dialogues. And soon we're going to be discussing danger cues to look out for that potentially warn you that you cannot trust someone. So you're going to want to stay tuned and subscribed to get that as soon as it releases. But if you like this video, then I think you're definitely gonna like this one too, because we're breaking down how to ask better questions all the way around, which is of course gonna be another tool in your toolbox to build rich relationships as you become more confident in dialogue and interactions. And so here's the truth. Here's what I believe to be true, and I hope you do too. You're worth building incredibly rich relationships in your life. Yes, it will take work. Yes, all relationships are potentially a risk. And I believe that it's a risk worth taking. I can't wait to hear how some of these body language cues have helped and improved your relationships and your conversations. We'll see you next time.